Welcome back to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. Thanks for all the likes and comments on the last video. And now, let's start with the first story. It's called Authorization Limits. I was a project manager working in a multi-million-pound business, where the single-use products were typically over 100k. The items typically sat in store for decades until required, or they eventually became life expired and had to be disposed of. My remit was a slightly unusual one within the company, as I was responsible for the post-delivery support, for which there wasn't a great deal of need, given the nature of the items. The bulk of the work was taking randomly selected units out of store and destructively testing them to check that they were aging as expected, and inferring from those results that all the rest of the stock was still sound and fit for use, if required in an emergency. However, very occasionally, items did get damaged during storage, special tools were lost, or someone drove a very heavy tracked vehicle over them. Our group was tasked with servicing these small value orders. To enable us to do this, one other person and I were authorized to produce quotes up to a value of 1k, without us needing to go through the full commercial approval process. We just had to keep the sales and finance departments informed. Oversight was maintained when and if the quote was accepted, and a formal purchase order raised. The full approval process was designed for the main company tenders and required a detailed breakdown estimate of man hours and bought out equipment, a cash flow analysis, risk register, milestone payments, etc. The value of these contracts was usually in the tens of millions, and hence required a formal review and sign-off by the managing or finance director as a minimum. The MD of our firm moved on to greater things within the corporate group, and rather than promote from within, corporate parachuted a new guy in, who was known to be hot on financial control. One of his very first acts was to cancel my ability to sign off minor orders. Instead, he insisted that they go through exactly the same process as everything else, which I could sympathize with, but the data pack required was completely and utterly over the top for our minor orders. We did petition the MD to be allowed to produce a streamlined data pack and a relaxation on director level sign-off, but this was rejected. It was at this point that we may have drifted into malicious compliance. We started to produce the full data packs for every little order, as required. We did, however, consciously make no attempt whatsoever to group like items together, or encourage customers to do the same. We made no attempt to make the new edict work in any sensible way. Instead, everything was done separately. A customer needs a new O-seal because one has split or been damaged, 12-page data pack detailing the whole thing, and then a meeting with the MD or finance director to obtain sign-off. It became an informal competition to see who generated the lowest value order requiring sign-off. I should also point out, the standard terms of the existing support contracts precluded the costs of bidding being included in these orders. I'd like to say that sense was seen and a streamlined signed-off progress adopted, but it wasn't. The MD just told us to stop bothering him and rely solely on the finance director for sign-off instead. It was still going on over 2 years later when I left. The next story is called Celebrity Neighbor. I primarily do high-end custom homes, 1 to 4 million price range. I'm a female, which isn't common in this industry, but I really love what I do, and I am fairly decent at what I do. In the past, my projects were primarily in rural areas on large ranches, but this particular project is in the middle of a large city, which means there are neighbors in close proximity, which is something new for me to deal with. The neighbors around this area are some of the worst, entitled, nasty people you can imagine, and one of them is a celebrity and his wife. We will call her B, who is also well known. I haven't personally had too much interaction with the couple. When B goes walking every morning, I smiled and waved, which I do with everyone, because this is Texas. And she would always ignore me, which honestly is whatever. I'm not going to stop being kind because she is unfriendly. I just started ignoring her. My job site has been really busy the last year, and most of my subs park along the street in front of the house. We all park on one side, facing the proper flow of traffic. If someone happens to park on the other side of the street, the neighbors call the cops or the city building officials. I find this incredibly annoying and childish, but whatever. I have my guys move, and it's not a big deal. That being said, I stop by my project every morning to line my guys out and check on work that has been done, make my lists, etc. Most of the time, I park on the very right side of B's property, which is just to the left of my project's construction drive. So my guys have parking in front of the project house. I'm not there long, usually 2 to 3 hours. One day I was outside the house and a woman approached me. I wasn't sure who she was, but apparently it was B's maid. She informed me that I needed to move my car, which was on the correct side of the public street, or B was going to call the cops. I looked at her and said there was nothing wrong with me parking there. The maid then proceeded to tell me that B was going to charge me $500 a day for parking in front of her house. I laughed and told the maid I didn't know they were that hard up, that they needed to charge a parking fee for using the public street. I went ahead and called the police to get ahead of the situation. He informed me there wasn't anything B could do about me parking in front of her property, which I knew. But I could get a ticket for parking within 15 feet of a fire hydrant, which is on the property line between my project and B's house. The officer informed me I needed to be 15 feet away from the hydrant. I thanked him and he left. So I did end up moving my car. I took my measuring tape and measured out 15 feet, which put me almost smack in the front of B's house. I decided to park in front of her front sidewalk for 2 weeks after that. Every time she does something rude to me on the street, which happens more than I prefer, I park in front of her house, just to set her off. Honestly, if she had just come to me in the beginning and asked me nicely not to park in front of her house, I probably never would have again, unless absolutely necessary. But the fact she was okay sending her help to threaten me really set me off. The third story is called Still Complained. A few years ago, I was living in an apartment complex on the 3rd story with no balcony. At this point, I'd been living there for almost 4 years. The 3rd story was the only floor that connected to the other half of the building for fire code access to 2 staircases. There are some steps about halfway to the other side that I'd smoke cigarettes sitting on. I'd always take the butts with me and swept every couple of days. I was a good neighbor. No noise, cat sat for the guy across from me, taught the old Russian guy how to use his appliances, helped people move furniture in and out. A new couple moves in. After smoking a cigarette on those stairs in between, the new neighbor guy comes to me and says, "Hey, sorry to bother you. Do you mind not smoking here? We can smell it in our apartment." "I'm so sorry." "Yeah, no problem. It won't happen again." We both went inside, and that night I walked down to the 1st floor each time I wanted to smoke. The next morning I got a call from the apartment complex saying they received a complaint that I was smoking on the stairs in the connecting walkway. I admit that I did do that and have since started going all the way down to the parking lot. "Oh, you don't have to do that. Any stair landing area is allowed smoking, pretty much anywhere, except where you were." "Okay, thanks." I started smoking on the stair landing. That forced them to walk past me and was closer to their apartment. Speaking to me as a person, I walked the 3 flights, complained to the complex after I fixed the problem, not going out of my way anymore. The next story is called Follow the Numbers. I work in flooring installation, commercial mostly, usually carpet or vinyl tiles. I have been doing this for 10 years now. I got a work order to do a head office for a large developer. It was carpet tile, but with a pattern, lines and border. I start installing, and just as I get the first tiles out, after laying the glue, the big boss comes out. He says I'm doing it wrong. I was absolutely stunned. I looked at him, looked back at the tiles I had just put down, looked at him again and asked, "What?" "Those numbers on the back of the tile are the sequence order. You need to follow the numbers. They have nothing to do with installation." So if I actually followed whatever he was saying, it would look like a mess. not the intended pattern. I tried explaining this to him, but he wouldn't have it. He got frustrated and called the head office, who in turn called me and said to just do it how he wants it. So I did. As I'm finishing up, he comes back, takes one look at it and says, "I don't like it." I smiled and said, "I don't care. That's how you wanted it." I packed my stuff up and left, and he didn't say another word to me. A few days later, I heard that he called the head office, asking for someone else to come redo it the way I had originally intended to install it. So the office sent me again, and I got paid to remove the work that I just got paid to install, so I can get paid to install it again. Needless to say that he didn't come out to make small talk the second time. The last story is called "Can't Work Like That." At my previous job, I worked as a peer trainer. Essentially, I was required to do my assigned job to its full capacity, while also teaching everything to the newbies straight off the street. Not only did I agree to do this, I had volunteered for it. So this isn't a story about overwork. I worked in a large room, where there were 5 stations of machines, all lined up in a row from one wall to the other. All stations do the exact same thing, just with their own bugs and hiccups. One wall wasn't even a wall, but a giant window that looked into the break room. I have major anxiety about being snuck up on or watched without my knowledge. Enough to cause sudden anxiety attacks that can last for hours, or until I can remove myself from the room and sleep it off. I hate it. It's super inconvenient. Thankfully, this isn't an issue for the most part, because since I know the triggers, I can avoid them or set up precautions. And my coworkers are usually understanding and don't sneak up on me. This window also proves to be a distraction for the trainees, because they will try to look for and interact with their friends who are in the break room. I get that the job I was training them for was boring as heck, 12 hours long, and on the night shift, but we were working on large machines that needed to be watched at all times, in case they jammed or broke, which was often. Thankfully, my station was the third one away from the window, so I could easily keep everything maintained. The problem was when a new supervisor moved to our area of the building. He was put in charge of Station 1 and Station 2. I'm assigned to Station 3, and technically speaking, Station 1 was supposed to be the training station. I had previously made a verbal agreement with his predecessor and the training team that I could stay on number 3 because of the previous points. Without asking or even giving me a heads up, I came back to work from a vacation day to find that I had already been reassigned to Section 1, despite the protests of my coworkers in my absence. A sudden and unprompted transfer like this was commonly considered extremely rude and was usually used as a punishment. I figured that, as I had never met this new super before, I would just go talk to him and strike up the same deal as I had with all his predecessors for 4 years. I even had the lead for Station 1 come with me to confirm my case and act as witness. She knew me well as an operator, because I'd come over to help her fix her machines all the time. I quickly realized that he was not going to budge on the transfer, so I told him calmly that I was ready to quit being a trainer that day and to have the extra pay cut off immediately. It's not like I was gonna lose my job, and the trainer pay was less than $1 more an hour. I was doing this because I wanted to, not because I needed it. He was shocked. We eventually agreed that I'd finish training my current trainee in my area, while he looked for someone else. And until my request to quit training made its way to payroll. He came back 3 days later, with no proof or paper, claiming that HR said I had no choice. This bothered me for a few reasons. First, he did not call me into a meeting for this. He, despite my many warnings to him about my anxiety triggers, snuck up behind me with a group of supervisors to deliver the order. Second, none of the supervisors with him were actually once in charge of me in any capacity. My lead, direct supervisor, or any of the training team that I was under were not there. This man was not my boss in any way. He was assigned to the training section, but had no authority over the trainers as trainers. So if a trainer was operating on a different section, he had no authority. The third thing that bothered me was that instead of looking for a new person like he promised, he took the time to find a way to force me to do what he wanted. As soon as he and his group appeared out of nowhere, to quite literally surround me and block me in. I could already feel that stupid fight or flight kick in. I could barely keep my brain together enough to actually register what they were telling me. I could only agree, in hopes that it would get them to leave sooner, hoping that I might be able to calm myself down and get in control again. I really hate causing a scene. When they left, I ran to break before I moved to section 1. Finally, this is where the malicious compliance comes in. Despite my best efforts, I could not calm myself over break. So when I went back and moved to sit beside the giant window, the added anxiety of that hit me pretty hard, just like I had warned. So I decided that since this came with a full and repeated warning from my end, I wasn't going to do anything to mask the anxiety attack this time. This time, however, I just let it happen. My poor trainee had no idea what was going on, and I was unable to teach her anything, because I will go non-verbal when my anxiety acts up, which means I'm completely useless as a trainer. When my coworker got back from his break, a prior trainee of mine and an old sweetheart, he covered me so I could go home. After a few calls and texts to my leads and coworkers, I used up some PTO and didn't come back in until I was no longer officially a trainer and could transfer back to my area. Its supervisor was fired a few weeks later due to multiple complaints, on top of being caught in the act with a coworker inside the building. She got fired too, much to the joy of everyone else. She was a Karen and yelled at 2 of my very young and nervous trainees for following orders she didn't understand. Honestly, they are a match made in hell, and I hope they ended up happily together, so no one else would have to suffer their attention. Thanks for watching the video to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. And if you have time, watch another one of my videos. Also, if you want to support me further, check out the channel membership or Patreon. And now I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye bye.